The Miss Frontier program is really kind of special. We actually started the Miss Frontier program in 1931. The very first Miss Frontier is right here in the corner, is Jean Nemo Du Bois. So she starts there. If you wanted to tell people how to get started and see how everybody is arranged here, we start right there with Jean Nemo Du Bois, and then we go clockwise around the outside of the room, and then we go to this line of banners over here starting in 1989, and then it goes year by year all the way through. Some of these Miss Frontiers in this row were my students at LCCC. I hate thinking about that, but there you go. But anyway, so that's how you want to get started. Now, the way Miss Frontier is selected now is that they actually make application and they are interviewed by the Cheyenne Frontier Day Committee. So the person that they actually interview every year for Miss Frontier is the lady in waiting. The Miss Frontier is already known from the year previous. Right, so it is something that, so every young woman that gets into the program comes in as the lady in waiting, and then if they win, then they get to shadow the Miss Frontier for the previous year to learn everything about that job and what it means to Cheyenne Frontier Days, and then as they go ahead and share that with the next lady in waiting the next year. That is not how that originally happened. It originally happened that Jean Nemo Du Bois in 1931 was up against about 6 other young women here in the city of Cheyenne to be named Miss Frontier, and the criteria was each Miss Frontier was, or candidate I should say, was sponsored by a certain group. Like for Jean Nemo Du Bois, it was American Legion Post 6. And there were several other posts that went ahead and had their own candidates, and how they were chosen was which group was able to sell the most CFD tickets. All right. So in 1931, the American Legion Post 6 sold the most tickets, and as a result, Jean Nemo Du Bois became the very first Miss Frontier. All right. Now, what's fun about her is that she didn't know what that meant. CFD didn't know what that meant, and so they had to basically think about this. She actually worked at her job. She was down at the Cheyenne Chamber of Commerce and only got up to Frontier Park twice. All right, the rest of the time she was taking correspondence, notes, and arranging meetings down at the Cheyenne Chamber of Commerce. All right, the only thing that she got for being Miss Frontier was a nice hat, which she has in the picture, and a pair of boots. Everything else was her own wardrobe, and she could pick out whatever she wanted. All right. After that, they continued the contest all the way up until, I believe, 1936. So for the first 5 years, the Miss Frontiers were chosen by the same system, the same contest. Then they realized how important Miss Frontier was as an ambassador, and they thought she should be answerable to the CFD committee. And so that's when they started the process. That very first year, they got a Miss Frontier and Lady in Waiting at the same time, and then they basically kept rotating the Miss Frontiers out from that point forward. And that's when you start seeing a more uniform Miss Frontier outfit. For the first 5 years, Miss Frontier basically got a pair of boots and a hat. They may not have known how to ride a horse. All right, so that, it was a very interesting situation. But very gradually, they came up with a philosophy that a Miss Frontier should represent the ranching community and the ranching families of Wyoming. Now, that doesn't necessarily still hold true. There are many Miss Frontiers that didn't have a lot of ranching experience, but for the vast majority, it did. It's kind of a tradition that has stuck, that many of these young women do represent old ranch families that have supported Cheyenne Frontier Days or have been part of the pioneer community from Wyoming's earliest days all the way to the present. All right, so we have all these very interesting Miss Frontiers all the way up until, with various outfits until about 1935, 1936. The very first time that we began to see Miss Frontier buckskins was in 1936, and that was because we had in 1935 a very interesting performer who came to do a very controversial show for the night show for Cheyenne Frontier Days, and her name was Sally Rand. And if you guys have ever heard of Sally Rand, you know I'm talking about a lady who liked to show up on stage with 2 gigantic ostrich feather fans and nothing else except for the high heel shoes she was wearing. Now, at first, people in Cheyenne were offended that this would even happen, but then when they saw her, they realized that it was extremely tasteful because it only left things up to the imagination. You never got to see anything. That was, up to that point, the most popular Cheyenne Frontier Days night show. And there were many wives who wanted to know where their husbands were on that night, all right? But they did find out that she did a very good job. Now, when she stepped off the train, she was wearing a pair of white buckskins, and people thought that was so fantastic. They really appreciated it. And she said, well, what you guys need to do is you need to have your ambassador wear something unique like this outfit. And everybody said, done. So from 1936 on, we've had the traditional CFD buckskins. The wonderful thing about that is they still didn't quite really know what that was going to be. So from about 1936 to 1939, you have different variations of what the buckskins were going to look like. They weren't solidified. 1939 was kind of the last straw. Before that, everybody had variations of black leather. In 1939, it was an all-black Miss Frontier outfit. That was the only time, because wearing all black leather in Frontier Days in July is not great. And so they decided to go with white from that point forward, which is what Sally Rand had. And we've consistently had the same outfit for the most part for the rest of CFD's history. The only thing is that the skirt, or basically the vest has been the same. The shirt has changed over time. We did not have a CFD logo, the arrowhead and the horse, until 1961. And so many of the earlier Miss Frontiers just had the bucking horse on their shoulder, bucking horse and rider. So you'll see that a lot if people have questions about that. Now, the hat styles changed from Miss Frontier every year. You can look around, you can see how the hat styles changed. The history of the cowboy hat is on display with Miss Frontier on how it evolved. They usually had that banner that got pinned on. They also had a badge. I believe it was around 1942 that the Laramie County Sheriff's Department basically made Miss Frontier an honorary deputy, and so she got that badge. And so then you begin to see that. And you also might notice that as you look at all these women that go through this, through the room, we begin to finally see the appearance of Native American squash blossoms and beaded headbands starting around 1975. All right? Before that time, there wasn't really that announced and very direct connection between Miss Frontier and the Indian Committee until that time. And I believe the first one to actually wear a Native American hat band was Cynthia Lummis. All right, so it starts there in 1976, the bicentennial. And then thereafter, the squash blossoms and other accoutrements that are gifts to Miss Frontier from the Indian Committee start showing up, and they become very prominent with all the later Miss Frontiers. The traditional colors for the Miss Frontier outfit has been white. But as you can see, even starting as late as the late 1980s, you began to have variations. They started going away from just white, and the only thing that they've really changed is the shirt. They've added blue, which was very different for everybody. White's still the traditional color, but we had blue in 1989. Then in 1996, for the 100th, they introduced red as a shirt for Miss Frontier, red and black. For Miss Frontier, and then in the year 2021, Bailey Bishop introduced red buckskins for the first time. They wanted to do something special to commemorate that particular Miss the 125th. That's right, 125th Cheyenne Frontier Days, and the fact that we're returning from COVID-19. So she is the only one so far that has had red bucks. I take that back. She started with red buckskins, and now we have combinations of both. We have red and white for Miss Frontier. So we're continuing to adapt and change. The other thing that has always changed with the Miss Frontier outfit over time, you don't see it in many of the early pictures, but the hemline changed. And that was basically a reflection of what was popular at the time. The very shortest hemline belonged to Carol Wackerlin, which is Miss Frontier 1968. They were basically tasseled hot pants. All right, so very, very short. The longest hem for Miss Frontier actually belonged to Boo Edwards, Miss Frontier 2000 and, let's see, I can't remember, I can't see here. 2006, yeah, they were basically pants. So she had the longest hemline, and Carol Wackerlin had the shortest. And it changed year by year on what was popular and appropriate during that time period. So the 1960s, they were very short. During the 1970s, they were short, and then they started getting longer again. So who knows? The pendulum might swing the other way. But right now, there has not been a lot of variation of the Miss Frontier outfit aside from the colors. Okay, so the other thing you might want to point out to people is that there are some mother-daughter teams for Miss Frontier. One of the best I like to point out is the Kilty family. We have Joy Kilty, who I believe is Miss Frontier 1950. There she is. Joy Vanderhey Kilty was Miss Frontier 1950, followed by her daughter, who is Deidre Kilty, who is all the way over here in 1978. All right, and then after 1978, she's right there. But then we've had others. We've had Mary Wepner, and then her daughter, Jody Wepner. And so we've also had the Cruz family, have also had a mother-daughter, and of course the Edwards family with Beth and Boo. So it does happen that you have mother-daughter all the way through. And so we are always looking out for the next pairing of another Miss Frontier following her mother into the program. So we've had a couple of sets.